Hi, it's Brad Truex again from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. Today we're going to talk about sign. Our woodlands and wetlands are teeming with wildlife, but sometimes we don't see that wildlife. And that's because some animals and birds are nocturnal, such as owls and raccoons. Some are crepuscular. That means they're active at dawn and dusk. A good example is the bobcat. And others simply want to avoid humans. So how do we know that they're out there? The answer is by the clues that they leave. And we refer to those clues to their presence collectively as sign. So what are some examples of sign? Well, obviously, animal tracks, footprints, and track patterns, animal scat, pellets of undigested food, tree markings, rubs, scent markings, broken twigs or bushes, game trails, bones or remains of carcasses, feathers, tunnels, caves, and burrows, depressions in the snow where an animal may have laid down, the trunks, the spike-like trunks that beavers leave after they gnaw on the trees, and of course, sounds. Tracks are probably the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about sign. And a fresh coat of snow often uncovers a treasure trove of tracks. But snow melting can also obscure tracks and make them very difficult to interpret. Tracks left in the sand or the mud are usually much more detailed. And the patterns of tracks may provide information that individual track prints do not. And they often tell us what the animal was actually doing at the time that they were there. And keep in mind, you shouldn't disturb the tracks that you find. Leave them for others to see as well. So what do you look for in a track? Do you see both front feet and back feet? How many toes do you see? Do you see any claw marks? How big are the tracks? How deep are they? Keeping in mind that heavier animals tend to leave deeper tracks. What's the width between the tracks? What's the length between the tracks? Basically, the stride. What's the pattern of the tracks? And what type of gait is being demonstrated? And is it likely that there's more than one type of track or more than one animal? And are there nearby signs like a sit down? Use a pocket guide to help you identify those animal tracks. This is simply the New Hampshire Pocket Guide to New Hampshire Animal Tracks. You can download this online. You can print it out and fold it, put it in your pocket. This is the one for Massachusetts. Or you can get an app for your smartphone. One of the apps that I like to use is called iTrack Wildlife. Simply download it to your iPhone or to your Android phone. So we're not going to cover all the tracks. We're going to cover a few that you might see here at Eastman. This is a black bear track. You can see a front foot over here and a hind foot back here. This is what the track would actually look like in the mud. So again, it's a pretty big track. This is showing the tracks in some sand. And this is showing what bear tracks might look like in the snow. So once again, you can see a front track and a rear track here. One of the most common dilemmas that we have is trying to differentiate feline tracks from canine tracks. The feline tracks are over here. Now, we don't have any pumas here, but we do have domestic cats and we have bobcats. And there are a couple key features that we see with feline tracks. First of all, we tend not to see the claws. Remember, claws are usually retractable in felines, and when they're walking, those claws usually are retracted. So again, typically no claws are seen. On the heel pad, we see 3 lobes right here, and on the front of the heel pad, 2 lobes. And then when we look at the pattern in between the heel pad and the toes, it either looks like a C shape, or it looks somewhat like an H. Now that's as opposed to canine tracks, which we see not only in the dog, but in the coyote, in the fox, and in a wolf. We tend not to see any wolves here at Eastman. But here in the canine track, we do see claw marks. We also see that in the heel pad, you see only 2 lobes, and usually only 1 lobe in the front of the heel pad. And very characteristic of a canine track, is an X pattern. So if we look right here, it looks like an X. So that's illustrated down here, the X shape, which is typical, again, of a canine as opposed to a feline. Track patterns are extremely important because they can give us much more information than the individual track prints. They may help us identify both the animal that left them, and it may tell us what the animal was actually doing. It might tell you if the animal was walking slowly, running, galloping, hopping, etc. These are some basic gait patterns that you might see. A diagonal walk, most bigger animals, dog, cats, and things like bears and deer tend to walk this way. The front and back feet will move this way, followed by this side moving this way. A pace is a little bit slower, and this might be what a skunk or a beaver or a badger might do. And again, they do move one side at a time, followed by the other side. A bound, which you would see with members of the weasel family, looks like this one here. And then a gallop over here basically is what you might see with a rabbit. This is showing rabbit track patterns in the snow. Very easy to recognize. The rabbits push off with their hind feet, which show up here, and they land with their front feet. So again, you get the hind feet and then the front feet. They then bring their hind feet all the way through. So again, this is showing an illustration of what it looks like. They push off with their hind feet. They're going to land with their front feet, and then they push their hind feet right through. So again, leaves this very characteristic pattern. They start over. Here's some Fisher track patterns. Ed Sheeran is a ranger with the National Park Service, based out of the Vermont National Park, basically the Marsh-Billings Park. And the larger tracks here are from male fisher, and the smaller ones over here are from a female fisher. So Ed Sheeran put together a video that I'll give you the link to at the end of the session, but it basically shows you what the fisher was probably doing. The female fisher was probably wandering back and forth and stopped here. And she stopped there to sniff at the scent that was left by the paws of the larger male. And when we talk about scent markings, one of the places that scent glands exist on many animals, including the fisher, are actually on the paws themselves. So she's sniffing there. And this was in late February, early March that this was taken, which happens to be their mating season. So she was probably interested in finding a mate. Raccoons have a rather unique track pattern. Again, you see the front and the hind prints paired side by side, and the right foot moves forward, followed by the right hind foot, and then the left foot, front foot moves forward, followed by the left rear foot. And the distance between the tracks is about 10 to 11 inches. Raccoons have very unusual feet. Their feet actually look like hands. Okay, you look at this on a raccoon, they look very much like a human hand with human fingers. So again, they're 5-finger-like toes on both the front and the rear feet. And a small claw may occasionally show. So here you can see the claws. But again, you see these very finger-like prints from a raccoon. The bobcat leaves tracks. These bobcat tracks were actually left here at Eastman. And you can see them here. And they're almost linear. Note there's a very narrow space between the tracks, so it almost looks linear. And this is what we call direct registration. And this direct registration means that the hind foot is actually being placed and landing directly on top of the front track. So why do animals walk with direct registration? Well, it's a very efficient, energy efficient way of walking. A word of caution about tracks. Tracks can become distorted in the snow or in the mud, and sometimes they look very different from the animal that actually left them. Here at Eastman, the tracks we see most frequently are from dogs, humans, and rabbits. And I can't tell you how many times we imagine we're seeing tracks from a sizable mammal only to follow them and finally recognize it was really a rabbit that left the tracks. This is showing deer track patterns. And here you see the deer tracks moving in this direction. You see another set of deer tracks moving in this direction. So there are deer tracks in the snow, mostly in the direction of the arrow, but some moving across as well. And note how you might get confused between these and rabbit tracks. Okay, some of these almost look like rabbit tracks. Scat is the next most common sign that we'll see of wildlife. And the shape, color, texture, size, and contents of the scat are clues to who left it. Scat can tell us what the animal ate, and that in turn can tell us what animal likely left the scat. Where scat was left also can be an important clue. You can once again download a pocket guide card to mammal scat, and that's a good thing to have with you to help you identify the scat. Scat does depend on diet. Bear scat especially varies by diet. Here in the spring, it looks somewhat green and tubular, and that's because the bears are eating grasses and insects. Later on, it becomes soft when they start to eat lots of berries and fruits that are available to them. And it may become firmer again once they start eating acorns and so on in the fall. This is coyote scat. And again, the darker coyote scat means that it probably had a recent kill, and it was the blood and the organs of the killed animals that gives us the dark color. But again, you can still see hair. If you look in here, you'll see little hairs from whatever it was that the coyote last ate. Coyote scat tends to be rope-like, tapered, and spongy, and it gets often gray colored and filled with the hair and bones of small rodents. You can see here some hairs and actually some small bones that are actually in the scat here. And interestingly, coyotes usually place their scat right in the middle of trails or dirt roads or road intersections. Very characteristic of coyotes. Red fox scat, on the other hand, tends to be very light colored. It's more twisted than either dog scat or coyote scat. And both the fox and coyote scat will have fur and small bones in it because that's basically what they're eating, small mammals. And it may also have some berries and seeds in it. Bobcat, uh, bobcat scat tends to be cylindrical and very highly segmented. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different segments. Each one is about an inch in diameter, and it's often deposited in the scrape that's made by the hind feet of the bobcat. Raccoon scat, again, will vary depending on what their diet is. It's often tubular with blocky ends, and this is extremely important. If you see this, do not touch this scat. I'll tell you why in a minute. But this blocky end to the scat is highly characteristic of raccoon scat, and it's often found at the base of trees that the raccoons climb, and they tend to scat multiple times in the same area, so it becomes a latrine. And do not touch, do not pick apart, or do not smell raccoon scat. And that's because it may contain a parasitic roundworm that's very dangerous to humans. The location of scat is a clue. Where the scat was left can be a clue as to what animal left it. Porcupines tend to leave their scat outside the den. I'll show you later on a photograph of that. Members of the weasel family tend to leave their scat on elevated surfaces like tree trunks or rocks. And raccoons often leave their scat in latrines, as I mentioned on the last slide. And coyote scat, again, is often placed right in the middle of trails, dirt roads, or trail road intersections. This is showing basically a tree stump that some animals were using as a latrine. Fox, weasels, mink, raccoons often defecate on tree stumps. And in this particular situation, it looks like coyotes or bobcats were using this tree stump like a latrine. The location of scat is a clue. As we mentioned, members of the weasel family tend to leave scat in elevated places like rocks or tree stumps. And in this case, this might have been from a fisher. If you look at this, these look like porcupine quills. Porcupine has very few predators. One of them happens to be the fisher. So if these turn out to be quills, that would be a very likely sign that this was a fisher. And I think actually in this case, this was not. These were actually probably feathers. So it may have been a different animal that actually left this scat. Once again, this is showing a porcupine den, and you can see all this scat outside the den. The hallmark of the porcupine den is the presence of this scat outside the entrance. And once the snow starts in winter, the porcupines usually come out just out of the den, and they defecate and go back inside the den. And this often leads to very large piles of scat right outside the den. Pellets are another interesting thing. Sometimes animals regurgitate up undigested food. This pellet's from an owl, and you can see what the owl ate. It was obviously a small animal. You see some bones, some fur. And so we can often see what the owl actually ate. Scent marking is very common. Many animals mark their presence via scent, and the scent can be left either from their urine or special glands that are located either in the anal region or, as I mentioned before, right in their paws. They may scent mark to tell others to keep out of their territory, but they often scent mark to advertise themselves as potential mates during breeding season. Once again, many of you have seen this video. This is courtesy of Amy Hoffman here at Eastman. And we'll note both scent, smelling scent and leaving scent. So here the bobcat, which is probably a female based solely on the small, relatively small size of this bobcat. So here she's going over. She's going to be sniffing at some areas. So another bobcat may have left some scent there. And now she's going to leave some of her own scent. So watch, she's getting ready to scent. There she's getting ready. And here she's actually leaving scent, probably either from her urine or from the anal glands. And also her paws probably have some scent located in them. And here she's walking off. And in the video I showed of bobcats, I commented, you can see here there's bird feeder here. So she was actually probably out looking for prey underneath that bird feeder. The bobcats really aren't interested in the bird seed that fell on the ground, but what they're looking for are the small animals that may be looking for that bird seed. Coyotes also scent mark for mating. Their mating season is between January and early March. But before that, they in the pre-estrus period that starts in mid-December, there's a blood-tinted urine spot left in the snow by a female coyote. You can barely make out the reddish color here, but this was from a female coyote who urinated there, and the characteristic blood tinge is highly characteristic of a coyote. Sit-downs by the animals are common. Once again, bobcats often sit on their haunches while they're stalking prey. Here you can see the bobcat sitting there, and this is what it would look like in the snow. So once again, the rear end of the bobcat, including the rear paws sitting here, and you see two front paws in front. So that's very characteristic pattern. This is a bear bedding area. This is a deer bed. What if you happen to see blood in the snow? Well, if you saw blood, it may mean an unfortunate mammal met its demise at the hands of a larger predator. But it could also have other causes. As we mentioned in the last slide, the female coyote in pre-estrus may leave blood-tinged urine spot in the snow. And moose may be so infested by winter ticks that bleeding shows in the bed where they laid down in the snow. And this is showing that. This is a moose bed. And once again, you can see blood in these areas. And that's simply because this moose was so infested by winter ticks that the blood was actually showing in the snow where he or she laid down. Scrapes are left by deer and other animals. This happens to be a deer scrape. The deer uses its hooves to scratch the leaves and debris, and then the deer will urinate down their legs, and this picks up scent molecules from their tarsal glands, basically foot glands, and deposits in the scrape. And it's a way of deer communicating for mating purposes. Bear sign on tree is very, very common. This is showing a number of bear signs. This one, if you look at the pattern on the tree, on aspens and birch trees, typically you'll see some horizontal marks, long stripes here, streaks, but the vertical streaks here were left by bears. So why do bears mark on trees? Well, the bears can, of either sex at any age, can mark scent on trees or utility poles or signposts. But the majority of marking is actually done by mature males during the mating season. The bears rub their shoulders or their neck or their crown. They may also claw and bite at the tree. And sometimes they'll enlarge a woodpecker hole with their claws to get at the insects and eggs that might be inside the tree. And another benefit of bears rubbing trees, the thick tar of beech trees in particular sticks to their fur and to their skin for the longest period. And that tar happens to be water resistant, and it makes a possible tick repellent for the bears. Porcupines also remove the bark from trees. This is showing what a porcupine has done to this tree. And it's not only bears and porcupines that can leave bare spots on trees. This one is due to deer rubbing antlers on the tree. Bucks do this to both mark their territory and to polish their antlers. And this is again showing where a buck has rubbed antlers on the tree. Usually they only do it once they have hard antlers, and it peaks during the pre-rut, and they maintain that level during the breeding season. And bucks then rub their forehead gland on a tree to leave specific clues about themselves. So again, for mating purposes. Sawdust may appear, sawdust or woodchucks at the base of a tree. Here it's usually due to woodpeckers. A little bit bigger piles tend to be due to ants and certain beetles that leave piles of sawdust. And beavers and porcupine tend to leave larger wood chips. This is, again, from Eastman. This is off the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest, and it's basically showing the wood chips around the areas where the beavers have gnawed down a tree. I note these wood chips on the ground. They left quite a sculpture here. Now, the beavers may also leave some other signs. Here again, the larger tree that was chopped down, you can see clear-cut evidence that a beaver was there. But also look at these smaller ones. We call these small spikes. And these spikes actually were so sharp and located right adjacent to a trail that we actually had to cut some of these down to ground level because somebody could have fallen and actually impaled themselves on this. Beavers in particular like saplings that are about 3 inches in diameter. They'll cut these off and they'll take these and put these underwater by their beaver habitats, and they'll eat on these in the winter. This is basically showing a beaver lodge. And again, you can see above ground here, you might not see the beaver, but you might see his lodge. And the entrance is actually underwater. There are actually probably 2 entrances and exits, but the living quarters are actually above the water level. You might see signs of an owl activity. This little critter was probably not so lucky, but the owl was probably quite happy. There's a perfect print of an owl here, and in the middle, this little hole is probably where that small mammal appeared and actually got taken in by the owl. You may see signs of deer browsing. Again, deer browse tends to be rough-edged as opposed to rabbit browse, which tends to be very smooth-edged. So the image at the right is from deer browse. It shows shredding, whereas the clean-cut image was from a rabbit or another rodent that has incisors on both jaws. And this is basically just showing the same thing in a diagram. Game trails are also signs. Deer or other large mammals may be apparent because they trample the local vegetation. So once a game trail exists, other animals will begin to use it as well. And note this game trail, which is in the beaver meadow that you can see off the wetland spur off Sproingbrook Trail here at Eastman. And again, over here you can see a game trail where probably deer left this trail and other mammals are following it. This is probably also part of a game trail here. Holes in the ground or trees are also common signs that we'll see. Again, a hole in the ground or between the roots may be an animal's den or a burrow. And if you look hard enough, you may find one or more holes someplace out here that serves as an alternative exit for that animal. Cavities in trees are important. Snags, which are dead standing trees left in the forest, may have one or more cavities. And these cavities or hollows or even the broken tops of a tree are very important habitat not only for birds and bats and small animals. You may come across caches of nuts on your trip through the forest. Many animals cache foods in preparation for the winter. Squirrels tend to cache acorns and other hard mast like beech nuts. And the red squirrel usually has a single cache, but the gray squirrel often has multiple caches. And blue jays also tend to cache nuts like acorns. Squirrels may also leave piles of shells from nuts that they actually cracked open. And these are called middens, and these are collections of shells of acorns or other nuts, and they're very characteristic of squirrels. You may see fur or feathers that might be left over from an encounter between an animal or a bird and a larger predator. And similarly, bones may be all that's left in a predator's meal. Eggshells might be from hatched birds or turtles, or they might be left when the predator actually found those eggs. Coyotes in particular tend to leave fur and bones in the middle of trails. Sounds in the wild, sometimes you can't see them, but you might be able to hear them. You might hear a barred owl hooting, or coyotes howling, or a red fox screaming, loons calling, or the chattering of a red squirrel, or the squawk of a great blue heron. Let's see if we can hear some of these. That's coyotes. Coyotes actually howling. That's a red fox screaming. Some people have attributed that scream to the fisher, but it's not. It's actually due to a red fox. Hear that scream? Yeah, the call of the loon is very distinctive. Once again, this is the yodel of a loon, which is only done by the male loons. You've all heard the chattering of the red squirrel. That's the squawk of a great blue heron. And I'm always very displeased. You see this beautiful blue heron flying, and then they make that awful sound. And lastly, that's the hoot of the barred owl. And again, people say that this sounds like who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Did you know there's a rule of thumb? I didn't know this till recently. So what if you're actually out looking for sign and you encounter an animal? Well, EcoExplorer website suggests you use the rule of thumb. Basically, you hold out your arm and put your thumb between the animal and your eyes. And if you can't fully block out that animal, you're probably too close. If you can still see the animal, you're probably at a safe distance. So here are some suggestions for you when you're out on your sign hikes. Make sure that you dress for the weather and for the season. And remember, wear blaze orange if it's during hunting season that you're out there. Also take care to avoid any tick bites. So you're going to want to wear long trousers and tuck your socks into your tuck your trousers into your socks. Before you go out, know what wildlife is likely in your area. Bring one of those pocket cards that I showed you that's got pictures of tracks and scat. Bring something to measure with, and note that those pocket cards usually have a 5-inch ruler on them, so you can use that to measure. Other people will measure with their hand or their foot or a pocket knife or some other thing. Particularly when you're dealing with scat, I don't recommend that you use your hands. I think that's unsafe. As we mentioned before, you can catch a roundworm from raccoon scat. You can catch hantavirus from certain scat from voles or mice. So it's probably not a good idea. You might want to learn how to create a mold of a track. If you're really interested, learn how to take plaster of Paris molding of tracks so that you can decipher them later on. Bring your binoculars with you. Use all your senses. Remember, you're going to be looking, listening, and smelling. Keep a journal. Journal could either be on paper, or many smartphones now have journal capability. And use an app on your smartphone. As I mentioned, I like iTrack Wildlife Pro, but there are a whole host of smartphone apps that you can use that have both tracks and scat. And don't forget your camera. Most cell phones take great pictures and will also tag the photos with GPS coordinates so other people might be able to go out and see where you found either those tracks or the scat. Don't forget to bring your friends with you and respect the wildlife. And use your imagination, but don't let it fool you. As we mentioned before, sometimes we'll see tracks that we imagine were left by a big mammal. Turns out when you follow them, it was just a rabbit that left those tracks. So here's some suggested resources for you. A book by Mark Elbrook called Mammal Tracks and Sign. Another book, Scats and Tracks of North America by James Halfpenny. The videos by Ed Sheeran of the Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Park Service. There's the link to it. I highly recommend that. There's another YouTube video by Barbara Bates of the Newton Conservators about reading animal tracks and signs. And she has some very interesting tracks to follow. And then there are many Facebook groups that you can join that deal with either tracks or scat or signs. So once again, this was Brad Truax. This was from the Eastman Woodlands and Wildlife, and we hope you've enjoyed this session.